Just 5 minutes ago, Buckingham Palace erupted behind closed doors. King Charles, known for his restraint, has just taken an unprecedented step, firing a trusted aide who has been at his side for decades. What could drive the monarch to such explosive action? The answer is darker than protocol. It leads to the very core of Prince William's shadowy financial world. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was swift, ruthless, unlike anything seen in the modern reign of the House of Windsor. The Aide, whose name had long faded into the background of regal ceremonies and polished portraits, was escorted out in silence, no headlines, no farewell, just a closed door behind him and a ripple of dread through the palace halls. For 20 years, he had been a ghost in the machine, never quoted, never pictured, yet ever present. Charles relied on him for everything, from state secrets to private confessions. He was more than a gatekeeper, he was the vault. And now, that vault had been shattered. Sources close to the inner circle say the decision wasn't just sudden, it was surgical. The moment the leak went live, Charles was handed a file, confidential, stamped urgent. Inside, financial discrepancies linked to Prince William, obscured within foreign investment vehicles and hidden charities. But the most damning piece? The aide's digital fingerprint, buried inside an encrypted chain that only someone with top-tier access could leave behind. Within minutes, the king acted not out of rage, but out of fear. Not for himself, but for the crown. This wasn't about discipline. This was about survival. At the heart of it was timing. The documents weren't just revealing, they were timed to detonate. Released anonymously just as the palace entered its annual fiscal audit, a coincidence that no one believed. Advisors clashed behind closed doors. Charles's legal counsel demanded silence. His communications director begged for a preemptive statement. But one voice rose above the others. The Queen's. Her face pale, her words calculated. This is deliberate. Someone wants the future burned before it begins. And in that moment, Charles knew. The aide had to go. Whether guilty or not, his presence was now a liability the monarchy couldn't afford. As the aide was quietly dismissed, escorted without ceremony through the back corridors of the palace, whispers began to slither through Westminster. A figure like him doesn't fall alone. If he was leaking information, what else had he stored? Who else had helped? And more urgently, what was Prince William hiding that was so devastating? It required such a sacrifice. One senior insider, under anonymity, muttered a single line that now echoes through the corridors of power. This goes deeper than anyone thought. The monarchy may wear a polished mask in public, but behind that mask, something is rotting. And in the next breath, it became clear this wasn't just about one man's downfall. This was a crack in the foundation. But to understand why this aide had to fall, why Charles couldn't hesitate, we need to trace the twisted trail of power, privilege, and betrayal that led here. He was more than an aide. He was a confidant, a fixer, a shadow in every room where secrets were spoken. So why did the king turn on him in a flash? The answer begins not in betrayal, but in blind loyalty, that may have concealed one scandal too many. For over 2 decades, his presence within the monarchy was so seamless, so understated, that few outside the palace even knew his name. But inside, behind the velvet curtains and ancient walls, he was known simply as Marcus, a first-name basis reserved for those who don't need introductions. Marcus wasn't just another royal employee. He was the one man Charles could rely on in the storm. Through divorces, family implosions, constitutional blunders, and tabloid warfare, Marcus stood silently beside the future king, absorbing the chaos and orchestrating damage control like a maestro. But there's a cruel irony in being that close to power, because when things go wrong, the blade never falls far. His fingerprints were never on the scandals, but his eyes always were. When stories of infidelity whispered through the palace gates, Marcus was there. When Prince Andrew's controversies rippled across the Commonwealth, Marcus was the one crafting exit strategies before headlines even dropped. When William and Harry's relationship cracked, and when Meghan was quietly erased from the royal photos, Marcus wasn't just present, he was the architect of calm. He lived in the grey zone where ethics blur and loyalty becomes dangerous. And for years, that made him invaluable. But power built on silence comes at a price. Marcus had unfettered access, financial ledgers, foreign accounts, legal briefings marked eyes only. He knew where the money moved, and more importantly, why. He was a bridge between Charles's private estate and public duty. And somewhere along the line, he crossed a boundary no one saw until it was too late. The whispers say Marcus knew about William's offshore dealings months ago, maybe even years, that he had covered for the prince once before, when irregularities surfaced around a private conservation fund with undisclosed international ties. Those records vanished, neatly. No investigation followed. Yet now, when the leak detonated, Marcus said nothing. Not in defense, not in protest. And perhaps that's what sealed his fate. His silence, once his greatest weapon, now became a threat of its own. Charles, blindsided and pressured, began to ask himself the one question he had always buried. What did Marcus hide for William that even he, the king, didn't know? Trust morphed into fear, and the man who had protected the monarchy from scandal after scandal suddenly looked like the one man who could burn it all down. Some say Marcus went rogue. Others believe he was simply tired of being the shield for a legacy that rewarded silence with exile. Either way, the moment the documents surfaced, so did suspicion. It wasn't just what Marcus had done, but what else he might still do. The king didn't just fire an aide, he cut off the monarchy's memory. And then came the leak, the moment a loyal servant became a ticking time bomb. A sudden leak hits the press, anonymously uploaded, almost instantly deleted. But not before screenshots and whispers tear through elite networks. Prince William's finances, offshore funds, undeclared gifts, and something much worse. The monarchy faces its most volatile scandal since Diana. It began in silence, an anonymous file uploaded to a fringe financial watchdog site at precisely 2:14 a.m. The post was live for under 7 minutes. 7 minutes before it was yanked from the server, its links broken, its presence scrubbed. But in today's digital underworld, 7 minutes is an eternity. The screenshots were already circulating in private group chats, encrypted email chains, and high-level financial circles. By dawn, they had reached every newsroom worth its ink, and by midday, they had gone viral. The documents were damning: complex ledgers, shell corporations, and what appeared to be foreign trusts bearing William's initials. But the deeper horror wasn't just the money, it was where that money may have come from. The files painted a picture of wealth beyond what the public knew, a sprawling network of discrete holdings stretching across tax havens, fronted by charities and consultancy firms. One trust traced back to the Cayman Islands was linked, through a series of murky transactions, to a luxury property investment group tied to arms development in North Africa. If the connection proved real, it would mark a catastrophic departure from royal neutrality, a future king's wealth intersecting with weapons profiteering. Analysts raced to verify the authenticity. Whistleblowers began contacting journalists. Parliament grew agitated. Behind the scenes, legal teams scrambled to apply pressure to kill the story before it grew teeth, but it was already too late. The infection had spread. Within 24 hours, the palace was forced into a panic lockdown. No comment, no denial, just a wall of silence that made things worse. Speculation bloomed like wildfire. Had William knowingly participated in this, or had someone close to him orchestrated the web behind his back? And then the question no one dared voice. Was this the first leak? Or merely the first to escape suppression? The monarchy had danced on the edge of financial controversy before: tax loopholes, questionable inheritances, awkward partnerships, but nothing like this. This was radioactive. This wasn't a tabloid scandal. This was a constitutional crisis in slow motion. Even those in Parliament who had long remained loyal began to shift uneasily. The Prime Minister received a closed-door briefing marked privileged and confidential. Senior MPs began to murmur about accountability, about the financial obligations of the crown. Meanwhile, William, normally stoic in the public eye, cancelled a scheduled appearance without explanation. The world noticed. The public, already wary of royal excess, exploded with outrage. Social media turned brutal. Hashtags like #Windsor leaks and #Not My Future King trended across Europe. Former supporters turned cold, and long-held royalist faith began to fracture. But within the growing chaos, a quieter thread began to emerge one few wanted to follow. Because buried deep in the metadata of the original files, experts noticed something unusual. The document chain appeared to originate from inside the palace. Not from an outside hacker, not from a foreign journalist. The source was internal, someone close, someone trusted. And as digital footprints were traced, anonymized logins dissected, and communications backtracked, the suspicion grew heavier. Not just about William, but about who wanted him exposed. But who leaked it, and why now? All signs began to point back to one man, and one impossible truth. The most chilling question wasn't what was leaked, but who knew enough to do it. Every royal aide was vetted, every device controlled. Unless someone on the inside wanted this fire. Was this a warning shot or a full-blown mutiny? Behind the polished veneer of monarchy lies a system of control so absolute, so rehearsed, that nothing escapes without being seen, filtered, signed off. Yet this leak didn't just slip through cracks, it came from within. The moment the documents went public, a covert internal investigation launched at Buckingham Palace. Not the kind that's spoken about in public. This was a silent inquisition. Devices were seized, logs traced, comms reviewed. And amid the flurry, one name kept surfacing not because he was loud, but because he had gone completely silent. Marcus, the once indispensable aide, his personal phone disconnected, his work line unanswered. The man who had stood beside the king through every crisis had vanished without a word. At first, they assumed discretion. Perhaps he was complying with the legal team, maybe protecting the crown in silence, as he had always done. But then came something stranger. A ping from a royal IP address, one that should have been inactive. Tied not to a current working device, but to an archived laptop last known to be used by Marcus himself. On that ping, a trace of encrypted correspondence. Short, masked, but enough to suggest that someone, possibly Marcus, had the technical knowledge and internal access required to bypass the palace's digital fortifications. The implication was unthinkable. Had the man Charles trusted most orchestrated the very leak that now threatened to destroy his son? Inside the palace, whispers turned to panic. No one could say it aloud, but the theory spread like poison. Marcus had been sidelined for months, stripped from key meetings, replaced in private briefings. Some believed Charles had begun listening to newer, younger advisors. That Marcus had grown obsolete in a palace that rewards freshness and punishes memory. And what happens to a man like that when you take away his influence but leave him with every secret? Then came a second layer of terror. Another aide, younger, quieter, with ties to the communications team, stepped forward anonymously through legal counsel. She claimed that Marcus had approached her weeks earlier, irate, muttering about rotting foundations and the sins of golden heirs. She described veiled threats, not of violence, but of exposure. That the truth would come out, with or without royal approval. At first, her warning was dismissed. Now, it played like a prelude. Blame spiraled through the palace like a broken compass. Charles' inner circle fractured. Old loyalties tested. New alliances formed behind closed doors. Some suspected Marcus was only the face of something larger, that others were involved, hidden deeper still, that this wasn't a spontaneous betrayal but a calculated reckoning, orchestrated by someone who had waited patiently for the right moment to strike. Every moment of calm was now laced with paranoia. Every silence, a threat. Every trusted glance, a doubt. The monarchy wasn't just under attack, It was eating itself from the inside. But if this was revenge, what was he trying to expose about William and what had been buried for years? Prince William, the heir beloved by millions, portrayed as the modern royal. But behind the smile, a hidden empire unfolds. Shell companies, billion-pound investments, and secret donors with murky motives. What was William hiding, and who helped him build it? It was never supposed to look like this. William, the future king, had been carefully crafted as the monarchy's answer to a changing world, a symbol of stability, humility, and grounded leadership. But the image, now, appears to be just that. A fabrication, constructed atop a shadowed empire of wealth and quiet influence. The leaked documents didn't just expose numbers. They unearthed a vast, complex network hidden holding companies registered in jurisdictions designed for secrecy. A tangled web of real estate assets and global capital funnels, all traced back to one name, whispered behind coded entities, Prince William. Not directly, of course. That would be too reckless. The names on paper were aliases, legal veils, but the ownership paths looped back unmistakably. One trust, registered in Luxembourg, revealed quiet flows of capital from anonymous Middle Eastern benefactors, donors with no clear affiliations, but vast influence in oil and arms negotiations. Another company, masked behind a sustainable agriculture initiative, had been purchasing massive tracts of rural land in Eastern Europe through shell entities, later sold at inflated rates to government-backed infrastructure firms. Then came the real estate, properties in Singapore, Dubai, and Los Angeles acquired quietly, then flipped or left empty. A hollow portfolio with no purpose except value appreciation and discretion. But the most disturbing part wasn't what was bought, it was how. Because the engine behind all of it, the architect of the scheme, appeared to be none other than the man Charles had just dismissed. Marcus. The Aide's digital signature was everywhere. He had opened accounts, filed corporate paperwork, and orchestrated legal defenses in case scrutiny ever breached the palace gates. His fingerprints weren't hidden, they were engraved into the structure. But the question that split royal advisors was this: did William direct him to do it? Or did Marcus build the empire for him, unasked but enabled, believing it his duty to prepare a future king for the unspoken realities of global power? That emotional ambiguity now sits at the heart of the monarchy's greatest internal rift. If William knew, he was complicit. If he didn't, he was manipulated, exploited by the very man he trusted to protect his image. The environmental lobbying front was perhaps the cruelest twist of all. William's public legacy had long been tied to conservation, praised globally for his work with eco-charities. But behind those green banners were lobbying efforts tied to controversial land acquisitions, where laws were bent to permit development under the guise of sustainability. The same deals that enriched his hidden trusts were cloaked in the language of climate justice. Donors cheered. The public celebrated. And all the while, money moved through invisible pipelines, laundering influence behind good intentions. No one inside the palace could determine where William's awareness began or ended. Some said he was groomed into it, taught by Marcus to see wealth as a shield necessary for the era to come. Others insisted William gave the quiet nod years ago and never looked back. What remains undeniable is that the system functioned because Marcus knew how to make it invisible, how to build without ever speaking a word. But now, stripped of position and protection, his silence turns dangerous, and with every document exposed, every wire transfer traced, William's polished legacy fractures further under the weight of suspicion. And just when it seemed the scandal couldn't go higher, the Queen's name surfaced in the documents. Camilla never speaks out of turn, but in the leaked financials, her signature appears on one crucial transaction, transferring £12 million from a heritage account to an offshore vehicle. Why would the Queen lend her name to something so risky, unless she was trying to protect someone? The revelation struck like a final note in a slow-building symphony of scandal. Camilla, the Queen consort, who had spent years navigating the tightrope between duty and controversy, was suddenly at the center of a financial mystery that threatened to collapse the monarchy's fragile stability. Among the stack of leaked documents, some encrypted, others decrypted by whistleblowers, one line item stood out. A transfer of £12 million, pulled from an account labelled Heritage Allocation 6C, rerouted through a trust in Guernsey, then funneled quietly into the same shell system William's hidden empire had used. The document was authenticated. And the name on the approval line? Camilla. Clean, clear, in her own hand. The transaction wasn't dated recently. It happened 3 years ago, right at the time William's overseas holdings began their steep expansion. But it wasn't just the timing that raised alarms. It was the discretion. There was no advisory meeting, no paper trail of debate. This was a decision made in isolation, and that's where the questions began to spiral. Did Camilla act on her own? Was she manipulated by Marcus, drawn into a system she barely understood? Or had she seen what was coming and chosen, quietly, to cushion the blow? Some palace insiders believe she was intervening, not covering up. That the move was a desperate attempt to shield Charles's legacy from the financial rot she feared might one day surface. They point to a confidential dinner, a secret meeting held in the spring of that same year between Camilla, Marcus, and 2 royal bankers with known access to off-book accounts. No agenda, no records. Just one evening where, behind gilded walls, decisions were made that never reached the light of day. Camilla had been silent about it ever since. But silence, once protective, now feels damning. Was she coerced? Or was she the strategist, orchestrating a calculated gamble to buy time for the monarchy to clean house behind the scenes? Camilla has always been a survivor, and those who know her well say she understands power more intimately than any royal consort before her. She's watched her husband's reputation fluctuate under public scrutiny. She knows that William represents the monarchy's future and its most dangerous liability. In signing off on that transfer, did she believe she was saving them both? Now, the morality of her decision casts a long, painful shadow. Loyalty has always defined her story. Loyalty to Charles. Loyalty to the institution. But when loyalty collides with legality, with national trust, and with the will of the people, what remains? A queen caught between the man she loves and the son she can't control, between protecting the crown and possibly becoming the crack that shatters it. And through it all, she said nothing. Until now, her silence has been armor. But the leak exposed not only the transaction, it exposed her intention. And once the public saw her name, the fury spread like wildfire. The crown wasn't just implicated, it was complicit. Camilla's role has now become a moral riddle. Did she act out of love, fear, or quiet manipulation? And more importantly, if she had reason to act, what exactly was she trying to stop? But one royal was watching it all unfold, and had reasons to stay silent until now. He's the exile, the outcast, the rogue royal with nothing left to lose. And now, whispers from the West Coast suggest Harry knew about the leak before it happened. Was this his long-awaited revenge, or a desperate attempt to save the monarchy from itself? The silence surrounding Harry's recent trip to London now feels deliberate. Unannounced, unphotographed, and brief. The visit was originally dismissed as personal, a fleeting moment between estranged family members, but in the wake of the scandal, new information suggests it was anything but innocent. Intelligence analysts reviewing digital trails linked to the leaked documents have uncovered a string of encrypted emails sent to a journalist known for past associations with Harry and Meghan. The messages began 2 weeks before the leak, hinting at an upcoming truth bomb with royal fingerprints and ending with a chilling signature. The Phoenix returns. The journalist won't confirm the source, but the metadata, encrypted though it was, left faint echoes pointing west. Inside the palace, the theory quickly took root. If Marcus orchestrated the leak, could Harry have helped coordinate its release? Or, more troubling, did he have advanced knowledge and choose to stay silent, watching it unfold from an ocean away, knowing it would bring the House of Windsor to its knees? Those close to him insist he didn't plant the bomb, but he saw the fuse. and that fuse may have been burning long before the public caught the scent of smoke. Meghan's role in all this remains obscured. Some claim she was a bystander, uninvolved, even disapproving of the leak's impact on the monarchy's already fragile state. But others argue she was deeply aware of the timing and public reaction. That subtle PR cues, anonymous statements to sympathetic media outlets, curated silence on social platforms were all part of a broader plan. If so, it would mark not just a personal reckoning, but a calculated shift in the Sussex strategy from escape to exposure. And yet, the pain cuts deeper than any plan could explain. Because behind the headlines is a simpler, more devastating possibility. Harry tried to stop this. One palace aide, under strict anonymity, claimed that during his secret visit, Harry requested a private audience with Charles. It was denied. Twice, whether out of protocol or fear, the king refused to meet his son in private. Instead, Harry allegedly left a sealed letter, handwritten, unopened to this day. The contents remain unknown, but if that letter was a warning, then what came next wasn't vengeance. It was prophecy ignored. The media, as always, seized the divide. Old wounds reopened in public. William, painted now as the corrupted heir, stood accused by implication. Harry, the rebel prince, was either the villain who lit the match or the whistleblower the palace refused to hear. And the brothers, long estranged, became symbols of a monarchy divided, one holding on to power, the other to principle. But whatever Harry's intentions were, one fact remains. He knew. He knew something was coming, and no one listened. Not the king, not the courtiers, not the machine that has protected the crown for centuries. And as the scandal reached boiling point, the man who walked away may have finally found his voice in silence. As the walls close in, Charles makes a fateful decision, one that may doom or redeem his reign. Trapped between legacy and scandal, King Charles knows what must be done. One final move to protect the crown, but it comes at a cost. The Aide is fired. The family retreats into emergency lockdown, and the king prepares a televised address that may change history. It all converged in one sleepless night, the breaking point of weeks, unraveling in whispers, accusations, and buried truths clawing their way to the surface. The royal council convened behind heavy doors under absolute secrecy. No press, no aides. Just Charles, flanked by a dwindling circle of loyalists, each grappling with the same impossible choice: protect the future king or salvage the institution. Every strategy brought risk. Every path forward required sacrifice, and as the minutes stretched into hours, it became painfully clear Charles could no longer protect both his son and the monarchy. One had to bleed so the other might survive. By dawn, the decision was made. The palace released a carefully worded internal memo announcing the early retirement of Marcus, the man who had been the crown's backbone for decades. But behind the bland language was a calculated show of force. Pre-recorded footage captured Marcus being escorted from the palace grounds, not by aides, but by security, a silent message to the world. No one is untouchable. The clip, meant to be discreet, was leaked within hours, and rather than quelling speculation, it ignited a new wave of chaos. Social media exploded, the press circled like vultures, and Buckingham Palace barricaded itself against the storm. Inside those barricades, Charles wrestled with the burden no monarch before him had faced in such modern, brutal terms. This wasn't just a scandal. This was erosion of trust, of legacy, of everything the crown had worked to preserve in the age of digital judgment. The media team, in a frenzy, drafted multiple statements. Too soft, and it looked like weakness. Too strong, and it implicated the family further. Charles rejected them all. Instead, he chose to speak directly to the nation, to the Commonwealth, to history. A rare televised address was scheduled for the following evening, one that would, for the first time, publicly acknowledge internal betrayal. The language of the speech was delicate, its tone poised between sorrow and defiance. Phrases like a breach of confidence, deep disappointment, and urgent reform threaded through the early drafts. But the line that remained untouched from the first version was this: Even within our most trusted circle, there are moments when integrity falters. It was vague, but it was also a bombshell, a signal that the rot had reached the inner sanctum. That betrayal hadn't come from the outside, but from within the family's own walls. Meanwhile, the palace braced for the fallout. Crisis teams were deployed, legal advisors issued gag orders, communications were shut down, compartmentalized. Even members of the royal household not tied to the scandal were placed on temporary seclusion. In every hallway, silence echoed louder than words, and in the center of it all stood a king trying to hold together a crumbling facade while shielding the remnants of his bloodline from the tidal wave of public outrage. Charles rehearsed the address alone, staring down the words that might outlive his reign. It was his attempt to draw a line in the sand, to say, "Here is where it stops." But fate had other plans. Because just hours before the broadcast, something else surfaced unannounced, untraceable, and far more dangerous than anything that had come before. But before the king can speak, another tape surfaces, and this time, there's no going back. A hidden audio recording, leaked anonymously, surfaces just hours before Charles's planned address. Voices are clear. The topic? William's finances. The speaker? The now fired Aide, and a voice that sounds disturbingly royal. This isn't just a scandal anymore. It's a potential collapse of the House of Windsor. The file was just under 7 minutes long. No watermark, no origin traceable. It appeared in a private inbox belonging to a high-profile investigative journalist, with no subject line, no message, just the file name. Inheritance, shielded, wave. Within hours, it was everywhere rebroadcasted, dissected, analyzed frame by frame, and what it contained sent a chill through every corridor of power. The recording begins with a voice identified almost immediately. Marcus. Calm, measured, unmistakably deliberate. He's speaking about offshore accounts, about diversion tactics, about avoiding scrutiny from a tightening regulatory lens. But it's what comes next that drops like a guillotine. Another voice enters, confident, clipped, distinctly upper class. And to seasoned analysts, it isn't just familiar, it's royal. Experts ran voice print diagnostics, and while there was no official confirmation, the match hovered disturbingly close to William himself. In the recording, the conversation circles around exposure, what to say if the accounts are questioned, how to keep Camilla's involvement shielded from public record, and the importance of keeping "my father" distanced from any direct knowledge. It's not explosive because it discusses money. It's explosive because it confirms planning, strategy, preemptive cover. There is no denial to hide behind. No room for misunderstanding. This is, for all intents and purposes, an open admission of royal complicity. Marcus, in the final minute of the recording, delivers a phrase that has since become a rallying cry for a shaken nation. A storm is coming. They can either weather it or be swept away. And with those words, the curtain was yanked back not just on William, not just on the Aide, but on the entire structure that has kept the monarchy insulated for generations. This wasn't a rogue staffer going off script. This was the inner sanctum, casually discussing how to keep the people in the dark. As the audio continued to spread like wildfire, the palace descended into full crisis mode. Charles' long-awaited address was postponed indefinitely. No explanation, just silence. The same silence that had now come to define Buckingham Palace's every response. Legal teams were summoned again. Security increased. And within hours, Parliament issued a formal call for an emergency inquiry, an unprecedented move that sent shockwaves across the Commonwealth. The world press descended with renewed fury. Satellite vans parked outside the gates, cameras fixed on every window. Reporters demanded answers, but no one spoke. Not Charles, not William, not even the Queen. Inside, the atmosphere turned apocalyptic. Staffers were being questioned, phones confiscated, communications firewalled. The monarchy, once the symbol of stability in times of national crisis, now stood as the crisis itself. And still, no response, no apology, no denial. Just the echo of Marcus's voice, repeating in every media loop, "A storm is coming." And yet, perhaps most damning of all, was the image captured by a long-lens photographer just before midnight. The palace lights still on, the royal standard still flying, and behind a second-story window, the silhouette of Charles alone, unmoving, staring out into the night. The monarchy had faced abdications, divorces, even death, but never this. Never the possibility that the institution's own survival would be undermined by its heirs. It wasn't just legacy at stake now. It was existence. The monarchy has survived wars, divorces, and death. But this may be its final reckoning. Subscribe for part 2 as the palace fights for its life and the truth comes for the crown. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.